We
are
We are
cultivate.
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 Cultivate. We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Hi. So this week's episode is a doozy, and there's a lot to cover, but before we dive into it, I do want to note that this week we are having the final sale of the month, September 25th through the 29th, on our TeePublic shop, 35% off everything in the store. You can go there by clicking the link in our show notes, or it's also on our website.
Nice. Get your t-shirts. The holidays are just around the corner. Honestly, if you got a couple t-shirts or a couple hats and some stickers maybe.
And I think our spooky merch is out. If not, I will double check and I'll make sure that our spooky fall season appropriate merch is up on the store.
Nice.
This week, we are going to be talking about King Erik XIV of Sweden.
Okay.
It's a lot.
Is he a nasty man?
He gets pretty nasty. Yeah.
Oh boy. And his name is Erik. That's
Yeah.
like the most non-threatening name.
I know. It just makes me think of Erik the Bike Man, which is a Twin Cities reference because no one outside the Twin Cities will have any idea what that is. Erik's Bike Shop. Anyway, information was pulled from the following sources. A 2020 Factinate article by Scott Maza, one of those. 2019 The Creative Historian blog post, Destination Uppsala, 2 Find a Grave listings. Of course I didn't translate these. I translated everything else. Göteborg's Stadsmuseum, sure. Medievalist article by Minji Su, Thorkel Halberd article, We Relate, and 5 Wikipedia links.
That is very thorough.
And thank you, as always, to Carrie Ann for her research assistance for this episode. And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, CastBox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
So we are going to Sweden. So I am going to do my best. There are a lot of parentheticals in my notes of how to try and phonetically say things.
You should have run them by somebody at a coffee shop at one of the sister cities. There's like 12 Swedish sister cities in our area.
They probably look at my phonetics and be like, wow. And I'd be like, yeah, shut up.
Would have taken just one latte, Lindsay, for you to...
A polyglot I am not. So put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, actually, that would be kind of funny.
It would be funny. All right. Erik XIV was born on December 13th, 1533, at Tre Kronor Castle, the first son of Gustav I of Sweden and Catherine of Saxe-Lauenburg. That was a sentence.
And it was just to say that he was born.
Mm-hmm. Yes. His mother would pass away just a few years later on September 23rd, 1535, at the age of 21, just a day shy of her 22nd birthday.
Wow. She was very young when she had those children, too.
Well, Erik was the only child that came of Gustav I and her marriage.
Oh, so that's the start of his origin story.
Yes.
Oh, great.
A year later, in 1536, his father remarried Margariet Leonhufvud, a Swedish noblewoman, and she would bear Gustav 9 more children.
I knew it! I knew that the second wife would. I was like, you just watch. There's gonna be like 14 kids that just like casually walk out of her, and they're like all brilliant or like.
Mm-hmm. Fertile Myrtle
No,
over here.
yeah, they're like already like conquering all of their classes, and
Yeah.
here's Erik just being like, "What?"
Yeah. So she would have 9 more children who would be Eric's
9.
half siblings. These were John III in 1537, Catherine of East Frisia in 1539, Cecilia of Baden in 1540, Magnus of Sweden in 1542, Anne of the Palatinate Veldenz
Mhm.
in 1545, Stein of Sweden in 1546, who would pass away 3 years later, which is unfortunate.
Aw.
You're a dick for laughing at his name now. Just kidding.
No, I was just gonna say you could tell they started getting tired of having to come up with names. Stein.
Yeah. Then there's Sophia of Saxe-Lauenburg in 1547, Elizabeth of Mecklenburg in 1549, and Charles IX in 1550.
Okay, so you can kind of tell if they survived childhood based on if they have something behind their name.
Yep.
That's really sad.
So Eric's father would marry a third time following the death
Oh.
of Marguerite in 1551. So the year after Charles IX was born, she passed away. A year after that, on August 22nd, 1552, he married Katharina Steenbauch, and the couple would not have children together.
Good, I guess.
Because he already had a lot.
So he already had a lot. Yeah, I was actually gonna ask about the second wife's children and what their claim to the throne would be, but it doesn't matter now that she's dead, unfortunately, because then it's kind of next, right?
They still have some claim.
No, they definitely have some claim, but they would have slightly less now. Whereas if she were still alive, Erik would have had less.
Yes.
Now they're kind of even.
They're even Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to go back to Erik now that I've set the stage for his siblings and all that fun stuff.
His 80 million
half siblings, yes.
Siblings.
Erik received an education fit for an upcoming monarch. He excelled in foreign languages, mathematics, astrology, history, and he was a good writer. Fun fact,
Nice.
He was also very musically inclined, particularly on the lute.
I was just going to say, he sounds more creative than most male monarchs. I feel like this is more of like an enticing repertoire, like resume for a princess.
When Erik started to make appearances in public, the people referred to him as the Chosen King. And in 1557, at the age of 24, he was assigned the fiefdoms of Kelmar, Kronoby, and Uland, making Kelmar his home. A few years later, in 1560, at the age of 27, after a meeting of Parliament in Stockholm, he was given the title of Hereditary King, which means he would be the next in line.
Okay. What a stressful thing. Like, especially with so many siblings. My God.
Erik was described as very good looking, with a flush complexion, a long beard, close-cropped reddish blonde hair, and he was very healthy, which couldn't be said for all monarchs in the 16th century. Cough, cough, Habsburgs, cough, cough.
Yeah, well, like most of them at this time, if they're even on to like the second or third generation, they're pretty
inbred at this point.
They're pretty inbred after that.
Bucking against his father's wishes, Erik started marriage negotiations with Elizabeth I of England prior to her ascension to the throne. Like, he really liked her.
That would have been a crazy alliance. That alliance would have changed history for sure.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
He really had the hots for her. Like, he was like, I want you.
I bet he couldn't have her, though, because she would have wanted to stay. She would have probably wanted her own title.
But this caused a rift between him and his father. And although he pursued Elizabeth, like, she was his white whale for several years. White in more senses of the word than,
So much talc powder to
Yeah.
cover up all of her scars.
Yeah, so much arsenic powder.
Hmm.
He also sent out a number of unsuccessful marriage proposals to Renata of Lorraine, Mary, Queen of Scots, Christine of Hesse, and Anna of Saxony.
I bet you Elizabeth said no as soon as he sent a letter out to Mary.
Yeah, she's probably like, bitch.
She was like, the fact that you're even looking in her direction, you're dead to me.
You're dead to me, sir.
Get the plague.
Even though he was pursuing marriage, that didn't prevent Erik from indulging in other relationships of the more carnal variety.
What an attractive, healthy, beloved king getting around.
Yeah,
That there's not a single HBO or Netflix show about that.
never happens.
Mm-mm.
At 25, his first official mistress was Agda Persdotter, with whom he had a relationship between 1558 and 1561.
I love the title of official mistress.
Yes.
Like that implies that there were so many like
Side pieces? Yeah.
fake mistresses, like unofficial mistresses. What does that mean? Like one night stands, maybe?
So his relationship with her saw the birth of 3 illegitimate children.
Oh, wow.
Virginia Eriksdotter in 1559, Constantia Eriksdotter in 1560, and Lucretia Eriksdotter, who was born in 1564 but died at the age of 10. So that one was like kind of controversial because he slept with her right before he started a relationship with who would become his main squeeze. So we'll
His
get
queen.
to that. But yeah, so that was like his last, like, oh, hey, girl type of thing with her.
Mhm.
And Erik had a bit of a vengeful side, which became apparent in October of 1559 when he discovered that his sister Cecilia, who was unmarried at this time, was in bed with a man.
Mm.
She was at Uppsala Castle with her older sister Katarina, who had recently married Count Edzard of East Frisia.
Okay.
Rumors had been circulating that a figure was often seen outside of Cecilia's bedchamber, and it was soon discovered that it was Count Johann, Count Edzard's brother.
So they probably met at the party, the wedding.
He was like, hey,
and
girl.
just were like hooking up.
It became a huge scandal, with Erik telling not only his stepmother about it, but anyone who would listen, almost ruining his sister's reputation in the process.
So he sounds super fun.
Kind of a petty bitch.
Yeah. Super misogynistic too. Really securing his right to the throne by throwing her under the bus.
Erik's father passed away on September 29th, 1560, at the age of 64, and the news reached Erik just as he was planning to head to England to plead his case in person to Queen Elizabeth for her hand in marriage. Because up to this point, he had sent people on his behalf to, like, plead his case.
Yeah, and she wouldn't have gone for that.
And although his reign started the day of his father's death, his coronation wouldn't take place until June 29th, 1561, when he would be crowned as the second king of the Vauçois dynasty.
I feel like that's pretty common. Didn't that happen with the latest king of England?
There's typically like a mourning period, and then it takes a while before you're officially sort of quote-unquote sworn in as the new ruler.
Yeah, because I feel like Queen Elizabeth died, and it was like a couple months, I think, maybe longer, until Charles actually had his coronation.
It seems really long to wait like over like almost a year. Like it was over 6 months past his father's death, but I don't know. Who knows? I don't know.
But it was also going into from the winter, beginning of winter into the beginning of summer, so that might have a lot to do with it too.
That's true.
Or there might have been a war during that time, maybe.
Or, as you said, they're going into the winter. You'd want as many people, as many nobles there as possible. And traveling in the winter isn't always the easiest, especially in Sweden in the 1500s. So, anyway.
Oh, God, yeah.
After assembling a Riksdag, or a Parliament of Sweden, at Arboga on April 15th, 1561, He adopted what would become known as the Arboga Articles, which significantly limited the authority of Duke John and Duke Charles, his half-brothers, who were 24 and 11 at the time.
Oh.
So essentially,
He's like, I want all of it for myself.
he's reducing the authority that other nobles have in regards to the monarchy. So pretty much just like lowering their status, kind of.
Yeah.
Over the next 4 years, Erik would entertain Karin Jakobsdotter as his mistress, which resulted in an unnamed child that passed away in April of 1565.
Hmm.
And around this time, he also accused his first mistress, Agda, of being an unfit mother and had his 2 daughters that he had with her sent away to live with his half-sister.
Weird. Almost like he was worried he wouldn't have a male heir at that time. It was kind of backtracking and trying to have a legitimate heir somehow.
Now, it quickly became clear that Erik had an issue with the Swedish nobility, even though he himself was part of it. So he chose a man named Dioran Persson to be his closest advisor once he ascended to the throne.
Okay, so somebody who wasn't in the family,
Yes.
at the very least.
Dioran had just narrowly escaped execution by Erik's father, and he also had strong views against the nobility, particularly Erik's half-brother, John III. He was like, I hate that guy.
And he probably hated him too.
See, John had married a Polish princess and was the Duke of Finland. His close ties with Poland were a source of contention between him and his brother Erik. And when he pursued expansionist policies in Livonia, which is present-day Estonia and Latvia, which went directly against the Arboga Articles, Erik sent an army to Finland in 1563 to arrest and try him for high treason.
Wow.
Erik also had the Privy Council of Sweden, which was a group of nobles who advised the king, eliminated and replaced by Dioran. So it was just the 2 of them. The pair worked together to get the High Court to fund Erik's continued military efforts, and he would also use torture on the nobles to extract information on his enemies.
Torture on nobles. Wow.
Between the years of 1562 and 1567, Dioran, backed by the king, sentenced more than 300 people to death, although the majority of the cases were later changed, requiring some form of penalty instead of death. I'm assuming some sort of fee.
Like labor camp. Oh, yeah. Land.
Something.
Taxes. Yeah.
Erik desired more than just Sweden to be under his rule, and worked to expand his kingdom into the Baltic region and into Estonia.
Everybody loves invading the Baltics. The poor Baltics. They're just existing, you know? They just want to be.
They just want to live their best life, and everyone's like,
They just want to be there. And everybody's like, but like, I want to be there too, aggressively. I want to live here and like kick sand in your eyes every day. So rude.
So Erik's campaign led to conflicts with his cousin, Frederick II of Denmark-Norway. In fact, the bulk of Erik's reign is plagued by military campaigns such as the Livonian War and the Scandinavian 7 Years' War against his cousin.
Oh, God.
He was able to prevent their attempts to conquer Sweden, but he was also unable to capture any additional territory from them either. So it kind of ended up being a wash.
Yeah, so he was just punching himself in the face the entire time.
Yeah, it was just like a tug of war with like, it ended up being a stalemate.
No movement. Yeah. Okay.
Erik's reign took a dark turn at the start of 1563. It quickly became apparent that he was not entirely sane. He would become violent, paranoid, and he was suspicious of much of the nobility, but particularly of the Sture family.
That's the second family?
This is a different family, yeah.
Okay.
So at this time in history, Svante Stionsson was the head of the Sture family, and they were distantly related given that he was married to Erik's father, Gustav's sister-in-law.
Ooh, so like super spread. Like
Yeah.
by marriage, by marriage, by marriage.
Svante was born on May 1st, 1517 in Stockholm. He was the governor of Estonia during the Livonian War, in addition to being a Swedish count and statesman.
Hmm.
Svante married a woman named Marta Eriksdotter Leonhufvud on March 3rd, 1538, and the couple would go on to have several children. There was Sigrid in 1538, Magdalena in 1539, Anna in 1541, Sten in 1542, who died in infancy,
Hmm.
Niels in 1543, Stan II in 1544, Erik in 1546, Margareta in 1547, Gustav in 1548, who also died in infancy, Britta in 1550, who passed in infancy, Moritz in 1552, Karl in 1555, Ileana in 1556, passed in infancy, Ileana II in 1557, who also died in infancy, and Christina in 1559.
15 kids.
Yeah, lots of kids. Erik started a relationship with Karin Månsdotter in 1565 when she was the maid of his half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, who at the time was 16. Now, Karin was born on November 6th, 1550 in Stockholm, the daughter of Måns and Ingrid. Her father was a soldier who would later become a prison guard, and her mother came from a peasant family and she sold vegetables in Stockholm. It's believed that both of her parents passed away in 1560 when she was 10, but I couldn't find out from what, likely one of the many illnesses that would run rampant around this time in history.
Yeah.
Now, at the time that Karin sparked the king's interest, she was actually betrothed to an ensign or a commissioned officer named Maximilian. As soon as her relationship with Erik started, she ended her relationship with Maximilian, but he wasn't so keen to let her go.
No.
Now, in the spring of 1565, Erik's relationship with Karin became court official.
Ooh, okay. So lots of gossip at this point.
So he would openly bring her with him to court. He dressed her in expensive clothes and even provided her with her own royal apartment and servants.
Yep. Like, this is mine. This is my lady.
He ensured she received a proper education, during which she learned how to read and write. And at the time they started their relationship, Erik was 32 and she was almost 15.
That's disgusting. So he was more than half her age at this time.
Maximilian was able to sneak into the royal palace one day in search of Karin, at which point he tried to convince her to come back to him. This didn't bode well for him, as the king found out and had him executed.
Sounds right.
Karin was described as having long blonde hair, innocent eyes, and a calm, humble nature. As Erik's mental state continued to deteriorate, she was the only person who was able to comfort and calm the king whenever he got into one of his fits. She even traveled with him during his trip to Skåra in the summer of 1565, and the bailiff provided for her using army rations. So, like, you knew she was important if they're taking food away from the soldiers.
Yeah.
You knew it was official when Erik dismissed all of his prior mistresses, which included Agda and Dordi Valentinsdotter. Many within the court and the public believed that Karin must have used some form of witchcraft or love potion for the king to develop such deep romantic feelings for her, particularly because she is a commoner.
Yeah, but that's honestly probably, I think at that point in his life, he had never met anybody like her. And she's so agreeable that I'm sure his narcissism is just loving the fact that she probably says yes to everything in his life.
Erik would take action against the Sture family in 1566 when he accused Niels, who was then 23, of committing acts of treason for neglecting his duties. Prior to this, Niels had been on a number of diplomatic missions on behalf of Sweden, including visiting Queen Elizabeth I of England in 1561.
Didn't get me my lady, so
Yep.
screw you.
And going to talk with John of Finland in 1562.
And my war didn't end because of you, so screw you.
His motives for the charges seem to come from his astrology-backed fear that Niels may try to take the throne due to the fact that at this time, Erik didn't have a legitimate heir.
Yeah. And I think his inability to get him anything too, regardless, he's going to be paranoid that he's sabotaging him somehow because it didn't work.
Niels' death sentence was commuted on June 14th, 1566, and instead of being put to death, he was publicly humiliated when he was forced to ride in a hack through the town of Stockholm with a crown made of straw on his head and open bleeding wounds as a result of the torture he had suffered prior to this humiliation. So this is kind of like the Swedish version of the shame bell walking naked through the street.
Awful.
Following this, he sent Niels to Lorraine, where he remained at court through the end of 1566 and well into 1567, potentially working to secure a marriage between Erik and Princess Renata. Fearing that a coup was in the works, Erik also increased the number of his spies that were working for him on July 22nd, 1566.
Great. This always ends well.
Now, that same month in July of 1566, prior to Niels being sent to Lorraine, a farewell party was held and a secret gathering was organized to discuss what could be done to oppose Erik and his rule. This meeting included a number of influential nobles, such as Niels, his father Svante, Abraham Gustafsson Steenbock, Ivar Ivarsson Liljorn, Hågenwild Nielsen Bielke, Claes Eriksson Fleming, Steen Axelsson Bonner, Stenen Eriksson Leon Huvud, Erik's own brother Charles of Södermanland, as well as others. That took forever.
So all the people that he was paranoid about were meeting to talk about how they can get rid of him.
Yes. Meanwhile, Erik was set on marrying his mistress, who on October 15th, 1566, gave birth to Sigrid, who was treated as Erik's legitimate child and a princess, even though he and Karin were not married. The couple did marry in 1567 in accordance with an agreement he'd made in 1561 with his council that gave him the right to marry whoever he wanted.
Of course. How very Henry VIII of him.
Yes. Sometime in January of 1567, Erik's page, a man named Gustav Ribbing, was tortured into confessing that Svante Pelbroe, Gustav Steenbock, and Steen Eriksson were planning to sabotage Erik's plans to marry Karin.
Ooh, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Don't mess with the one thing that he is literally burning all bridges for.
Dioren was charged with finding evidence regarding these accusations, and Erik called for a riksdag in Uppsala in May of 1567 to settle the matter once and for all. So he was calling together a parliamentary meeting.
Being like, this is what I'm doing. Fuck you guys. Let it happen.
Several of those who had been invited to the meeting were sent additional invitations to stop over at Svartsjö Castle, which was on the way to Uppsala. The seemingly innocent letters tricked a number of nobles into agreeing, although upon their arrival, they were instead arrested and tried before the High Court.
Oh.
Those who were caught included Niels' brother, Erik Svantesson Sture, Abraham Steenbock, Steen Bonner, Ivar Ivarsson, Steen Eriksson, and Svante Sture. When an announcement was made that the Riksdag was now going to be postponed until May 18th in order to deal with the conspiracy against the king, the remaining nobles who were suspected of being part of the plot made the smart decision to refrain from visiting Svartsjö Castle. They were like, nope, nope, nope.
I don't want to die today or lose my land or be tortured for the rest of my life.
Those that held off included Pell Broe, Gustav Steenbouck, Abraham's brother Erik, Ture Bielke, and his nephew Hogenwield, Claus Fleming, and Claus Akessentot. Of those tried during the Svartsjö trials, Steenbouck and Ivar were sentenced to death immediately, as well as Erik Sture.
That makes sense. Like, he's been wanting to do that for a long time.
All of the prisoners were sent to Uppsala Castle for further investigation into the charges.
That sounds like torture.
Now, Marta Leonhuvud, who was Svante's wife, had traveled to Svartsjö with her daughter Anna to try and seek an audience with King Erik to appeal the prisoner's case.
Yeah, like he didn't know what he was going to do there. Please don't kill him.
When she was rebuffed from entering the castle, she wrote to Karin to see if she would speak to the king in favor of those that had been imprisoned. And she also wrote a letter to Virginia Eriksdotter, who was his eldest daughter from his relationship with Agda, so his illegitimate daughter. Neither rose to her aid, and once the prisoners were sent to Uppsala, Marta was also taken before being put under house arrest in one of the Sture family homes.
Yeah, that's not good.
Erik arrived in Uppsala on May 16th, 1567, suffering from a major mental episode that was described as, quote, a condition of incipient insanity, end quote.
It makes you really wonder what it looked like and what it actually was.
Yeah.
You know, like was he just like tripping out?
Was it schizophrenia? Like,
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows?
Was he just bipolar and having like a really extreme manic PTSD
type episode?
episode?
Who knows?
Was he just being a jerk and stubbed his toe and decided to ruin lives?
He chose violence. 20 nobles were assembled for the Riksdag outside of those who had been arrested. And on May 19th, Erik collapsed as the death sentences were going to be read following the loss of his notes. Like, he was just powerless to say anything without his notes.
Oh, interesting.
2 days later, on May 21st, Niels returned from Lorraine and was promptly arrested by Dioren, who denied his request to speak with the king regarding his imprisonment. He was like, no, you can talk to me.
Great.
Surprisingly, the following day, on May 22nd, Erik wrote a letter to Svante that cleared him of the charges of treason and announced that they were going to have a reconciliation.
Okay, how much money and land did that cost?
Marta continued to appeal to Karin on behalf of the prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And on May 24th, Karin met her in the Uppsala castle to let her know that the king had promised that he wouldn't hurt the prisoners.
Right, because no injury ever happens in prison.
Meanwhile, Erik requested that Sten Eriksson accompany him to the cell of Svante, where he got on his knees to beg Svante's forgiveness for how he had wronged him, promising that there would be a full reconciliation between him and the Sture family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sorry, bro, we're all good.
Mm-hmm.
So after this, Erik left the castle after having a conversation with Dioren, although it's been said that he instead spoke with Petrus Karoli, who was a member of the Church of Kelmar, who informed the king that his brother John had started a rebellion against him.
There it is. That's the reason.
So just a few hours after his initial visit to the castle, Erik returned and stabbed Niels with a dagger. And then Pila Wilhelmsson, who was Dioren's nephew, proceeded to murder Niels following Erik's attack, after which Erik once more entered Svante's cell. Now, after getting on his knees again, Erik informed Svante that he would have to kill him, since he didn't expect Svante to forgive him. And as he went to leave the castle a second time, Erik instructed his guards to kill everyone except for, quote-unquote, Stien. So led by Pelgad, the guards killed all the prisoners as instructed, including Svante, Niels, Erik Sture, Abraham, and Ivar. Now, Stien Balner and Stien Eriksson were the only survivors because the guards weren't sure which Stien
one?
The king wanted to spare.
Oh my god.
Which is terrifying.
Yep.
Outside the castle, Dionysius Bauius, who was once the king's tutor, he found Erik in this state of like utter madness and confusion. And as his prior tutor, he was making all these attempts to try and calm him down. All of his attempts failed, and the king ordered him to be executed before Erik vanished into the surrounding forest. So the guards stabbed Dionysius to death per the king's orders.
Awesome.
Fun fact, the murder of the prisoners was not shared with the public. In fact, the castle remained locked, and the guards would continue to accept offerings of food from the prisoners' relatives as if everything was fine.
Yeah, this is turning into like the end of something, you know? It's when everything's crumbling.
And it wasn't until several days later, on May 27th, that Erik was found at the village of Udensala, wandering about in a state of confusion and madness, dressed as a peasant.
Great.
He was brought to Stockholm, while Dioren obtained a decree on May 26th, so the day before, that approved the sentences that had been levied against the nobles that had been imprisoned in Savarchwe. It's impossible to know if the nobles in the Riksdag had any idea at that time that the prisoners had already been murdered.
They probably didn't.
Probably not. When Erik returned to Stockholm, no one went to see him for fear of inciting another murderous or mental fit. They were like, you stay there.
Just leave him alone.
Word was sent to his stepmother, the Queen Dowager Catherine Steenbock, who, fun fact, was related to pretty much most of the people that Erik had murdered at Uppsala.
Yeah.
So Catherine traveled to Stockholm to visit Erik, who got down on his knee and begged her for forgiveness for the murders. He also signed a power of attorney that he had written so she could negotiate on his behalf a settlement for the families of the murder victims.
This is weird.
It gets weirder. In retaliation, Marta, Svante's widow, demanded not only a letter of protection against further violence, but an official statement proclaiming the innocence of those he had murdered, in addition to the monetary compensation for their loss.
Oh, so she really wanted to shame him publicly.
She also demanded the arrest of the people who enabled his behavior, aka Dioren, his advisor, and Erik agreed to all of the terms. He even paid Marta in silver bars that were at the time worth 1,000 silver daler. Now, following the Sture murders, Erik's brother John was arrested, because remember, he was starting this rebellion. Although Erik continued to stay in this like perpetual state of madness for almost 6 months.
Jeez.
And during that time, he was tended to by Karin. In the meantime, the Privy Council ran the government until he was a little bit more mentally stable. They had Dioren tried and sentenced to death, but his sentence was never carried out. And once he recovered, Erik restored his and Dioren's power.
Of course he did.
Erik married Karin during a secret morganatic ceremony on December 29th, 1567, that was performed by Archbishop Laurentius Petri. Now, morganatic means that they were from two different social ranks. The following month, Erik and Karin's second child, Gustav, was born on January 28th, 1568.
His first son.
His first male heir.
How fitting.
In February of that year, while he was on a campaign in Småland, Erik's secretary, who was a man named Martin Helsing, was caught making an inappropriate comment about Diorin that angered the king so much that he stabbed Martin with a fire iron, which caused the man to suffer horrifically until he finally died on April 7th, 1568, 2 months later.
Oh, wow. That is a horrible way to die.
On February 10th, Karin was ennobled, sealing her as a queen, although she referred to herself as the chosen queen, as she knew that she was not fully accepted by the aristocracy. So she didn't refer to herself as like the true queen.
Yeah.
Erik attempted to reconcile with his half-brother John early in 1568.
Oh my God, this guy.
On the condition that he recognized the legitimacy of his marriage to Karin.
Just say you like my wife, and I'll let bygones be bygones.
Erik reportedly had plans to kill any of his siblings and other enemies that didn't approve of his marriage prior to the ceremony.
That makes sense to him.
But Karin passed this knowledge on to the Dowager Queen so that she could warn those under suspicion not to attend the wedding.
Wow, that's very kind of her.
She was like, I don't want people dying at my wedding. Yay.
Yeah. I know my husband's a monster.
Yeah, because he's kind of crazy. In lighter news, on June 9th, 1568, Erik's son Gustav was baptized by his stepmother, the Dowager Queen, which is nice. Erik officially married Karin on July 4th, 1568, in Storschikan at the Church of St. Nicholas, where she was crowned Katarina Magnusdotter. Their marriage was unique in the fact that their children, Sigrid and Gustav, were present for the royal wedding, confirming their official status as prince and princess, because typically the kids would not be there. It would just be adults. During the coronation ceremony, the Lord Chancellor Niels Yelen Juana fainted, which caused the crown to fall onto the floor.
Was he murdered?
Well, as you can imagine, this was viewed as a bad omen.
Yeah.
Which came to fruition not long after the marriage, because that's when the uprising started.
Oh.
With the charge being led by Erik's half-brothers, Charles and John.
The ones he kept wanting to kill, but he's got big regrets now.
Fun fact. Their uprising was funded in part by the very silver that Erik had paid Svanta's widow, Marta.
Nice. Dying by his own hand.
Erik was arrested and imprisoned by John, who assumed power on September 30th, 1568. Diorin was held responsible for allowing the Mad King's antics and was killed by insurgents after the Stockholm garrison deserted their king and turned on Diorin.
Nice.
Erik was legally dethroned in January 1569 by the Riksdag, and over the course of the next 8 years, 3 rebellions would take place to try and free Erik from prison and reinstate him as king.
No.
These included the 1569 plot, the Mornay plot, and the 1576 plot. Now, during the 1569 plot, which was led by Karin's head lady-in-waiting, Elin Andersdotter, and her personal secretary, Thomas Jakobsen, the plan was discovered, and the 2 leading the charge were immediately put to death.
I feel like that's kind of what they would always do. If they knew for a fact that these were the people, it's just like, oh, just kill them.
Erik was held prisoner in various castles across Sweden and Finland over the next several years. Karin was imprisoned with him, first at the Royal Palace of Stockholm, and then in the castle of Turku from 1570 to 1571, as well as Kastelholm Castle in Åland. In 1570, Karin gave birth to her 3rd child, Henrik, who passed away a few years later in 1574. Now, from 1571 to 1573, the couple was imprisoned at Gripshol Castle, where she gave birth to her 4th and final child, Arnold, in 1572. He died the following year in 1573, and it's unclear if she was at Greipshol Castle or Vesteruas Castle when he passed, as they were moved to Vesteruas in 1573. So it's unclear.
Okay. Yeah, when he died.
Initially, when the couple were imprisoned, their children, Sigrid and Gustav, were sent to live with the Dowager Queen and their French governess, Johanna de Herboville. They were reunited with their parents in 1570 when they were imprisoned in the castle of Turku. So, like, the whole family was imprisoned together.
Mm-hmm.
On June 14th, 1573, Queen Caroline and her children, which at this time consisted of Sigrid, Gustav, and young Henrik, were separated from King Erik to ensure he wouldn't have any more children.
Yeah. Please stop.
In his diary, Erik noted, quote, "My wife has been taken from me by use of violence," end quote.
I bet they had to drag her away kicking and screaming.
The queen and her children were put under house arrest at the castle of Turku in Finland, where she would stay for the next 4 years. The Privy Council issued a call for Erik's murder via poison on March 10th, 1575, if he could not be safely held in prison. So if someone tried to help him escape, he could be poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
The document was signed by many of the nobles that he had failed to capture back in Svartsjö in 1567, including Pel Broe, Tur Bielke, Hågenwild Bielke, Erik Gustafsson Steenbauk, and Sten Bonner's brother Gustav. This document was also signed by his half-brother, King John III of Sweden.
Yep.
In 1575, Gustav was removed from Queen Caroline's care and sent to Poland to be put in the care of Jesuits. At this point, Henrik had already passed away, and Caroline was able to keep her daughter Sigrid by her side. Erik died on February 26, 1577, in Årbyhus Castle from what many suspect was arsenic that had been mixed into a bowl of pea soup. Prior to his death, it was noted that Erik, quote, was taken from one castle prison to another, first with his family, then alone, occasionally sane, sometimes lapsing into insanity, end quote.
That's too bad.
He was 43 at the time of his death and buried on April 1st, 1577 at Vesteruas Cathedral. Fun fact, Erik's remains were exhumed in 1958 and examined to confirm the validity of the claims that he had died by arsenic poisoning.
Oh, yeah.
The forensic tests confirmed that he had been given a lethal dose of arsenic.
Crazy. That's kind of cool that we can confirm stuff like that now.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, in the 50s, 59?
58.
Yeah.
After Queen Caroline learned of her husband's death, she was allowed to leave and was given the royal estate Liuksiala Manor in Kangasala, Finland. She returned to the Swedish court very briefly on 2 separate occasions, once after she was recently widowed to ask for financial aid, which she was granted. The next was in 1582, when she, Queen Catherine Jagellon, and the Dowager Queen Catherine met at Svartsjö Castle. Years later, in 1587, Sigrid was appointed as the lady-in-waiting to Princess Anna, and she traveled with her to Warsaw when she accompanied King Sigismund there. Queen Caroline accompanied her daughter on the journey, and it was there that she was reunited with her son Gustav. She saw him once more in 1595 in Estonia, but unfortunately they were unable to talk to each other as he had forgotten the Swedish language at this point.
Oh, that's so sad.
Gustav was poor, working as a mercenary, and although she attempted to help him financially, she never saw him again.
Oh.
He died on February 22nd, 1607, at the age of 39, as a prisoner in Kashin, Russia.
Oh, man.
Sigrid went on to marry 2 Swedish noblemen, a Finnish nobleman named Henry Tott, with whom she had 3 children, and Swedish nobleman Nels Nelson, whom she married in 1609. She had no children with her second husband, and she would often spend time with her mother after she became a widow, until her death on April 24th, 1633, at the age of 66.
Wow.
Queen Caroline was respected and generally well-liked by the people of Finland, which was made apparent during the Great Peasant Rebellion known as the Kutchel War in 1596 and 97, during which they refrained from plundering her estate.
Oh, wow.
So they liked her enough to leave her things alone.
That speaks volumes. Well, and I was gonna mention too, like just the fact that she was granted money to like live and stuff and live out her days. She must have just been somebody that if they didn't exist, who knows how bad he could have been.
And I can't verify this. I can't back this up because I didn't research it, so just take it with a grain of salt. But I feel like his brother John, once he became king of Sweden and she came to ask for financial aid, I'm sure he just viewed her as someone who, not to bring light to it, but she probably had Stockholm syndrome, where she was like forced to do what his half brother demanded of her, and he probably was like, you were a victim in this too. Of course we're going to give you money.
Right. Well, and if it wasn't for her too, he would have died before their wedding.
She prevented his death on several occasions.
More than once. So yeah, it makes sense. And just like the fact that during a peasant rebellion, she wasn't affected as a noble, that speaks volumes to like, she must have just really truly been a nice person.
Karin died peacefully after suffering a bout of illness at the age of 61 on September 13th, 1612. She passed at her estate in Finland and is buried at Turku Cathedral in Finland. She was the first royal mistress to ascend to the monarchy in Swedish history since Christina Abrahamsdotter in 1470.
Wow.
And lastly, Marta, the widow following the Sture murders, kept the clothes that her husband and two of her sons had been wearing the night they were murdered. The Sture strongbox, a large iron box that she kept the clothing in, included 3 pairs of breeches, 2 velvet doublets and 1 leather doublet, 4 shirts, 4 hats, a single glove with letters woven into it, and a wreath made of straw. And these items are on display today at Uppsala Cathedral.
Crazy. It makes you wonder, like, why she really wanted to keep them,
Maybe to just honor their memory?
Maybe. I wonder if she cleaned them, tried to.
I don't think she did.
If she wanted to honor their memory, she probably didn't, or she wanted to use it as, like, a reminder that it happened.
And that's Mad King Erik the 14th of Sweden.
Yeah, he sucked.
Yeah, he wasn't so great. We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Yield Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
And this week's podcast plug is the Conspiring to Argue podcast. This bi-monthly podcast features 2 Midwestern guys, Ted and JJ, who present a contentious topic, examine the background, and then they each pick a side and debate the key points of their position. From conspiracy theories to true crime to cryptids, Ted and JJ will debate anything. It's part of the Darkcast Network, and we will have a link to their show in the show notes. And Carrie Ann would like to know, what do we like to do on rainy days?
Nap.
Same.
Like, for me, depending on the type of rainy day, it's usually, like, very close to triggering a migraine for me because of pressure changes and the humidity and temperature fluctuating. So on rainy days, I like to do the McDonald's method. I don't know if you've heard this, but if you get a McDonald's soda, typically they're Coke or Sprite, and then their French fries, it helps kind of replenish your electrolytes, I guess, when you have an impending migraine. And so people will eat these, or like eat the hash browns, because apparently they have like the perfect amount of starch and salt and carbonation or whatever to stave off a migraine. So I usually will order that or grab that at some point during the day. Depending on the temperature, I usually like to make food Like I'll make like a soup or a stew or something that kind of sticks to you. And then I just nap and read, relax. Because normally my body's pretty mad at that point. And the dogs are sleeping because they don't like the water and they don't want to go outside. So we just kind of do a cuddle puddle. What about you?
I also like to take naps. I enjoy reading on rainy days, either on my Kindle or a physical book, or just kind of just generally being lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Rotting.
Herkle-durkling.
Mm-hmm.
For those that don't know what herkle-durkle means, it's when you are awake, but you choose to stay in bed for much longer instead of getting out of bed to do what you should be doing for the day. That's a herkle-durkle. So, want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
What's something good you'd like to share?
My something good I'd like to share is the past couple of months, honestly, have just been kind of stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And overall a lot. And I feel like we've got some things kind of coming together and some good things sprinkling in throughout each day to the point where I'm despite being in a pretty stressful situation in general now, I'm feeling pretty good.
That's good.
Feeling pretty relaxed. Everybody seems to be okay. I got to see Mom and Dad's kitten Boo briefly this weekend, and he's turning silver. He's all black, but he's been starting to get a bunch of like gray, like coarse, like wiry almost feeling fur. And apparently most animals that have that kind of like steel colored coat, they're usually born all white or all black and then grow into the color. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see what he looks like. But when I saw him, I immediately thought he looked like a little werewolf, and it was like the cutest thing. This little werewolf baby. Yeah, that's my good thing. What about you?
My good thing is I had my first weekend shift at Pumpkin Patch this past weekend, and it was really fun. It was very busy. As far as like, there weren't a ton of people there, but it was very busy as far as my schedule. Like, because I would...
Right. You had a lot to do.
Yeah, so I would like wear the mascot costume for a little bit, and then every hour starting at like 11 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. It was 5 p.m. before. We do the pumpkin cannon, and 3 times a day I do the Farfel show with the pumpkin eating dragon as the farmer, and I would do like 3 different rounds as the mascot walking around the farm, and then we have the candy cannon at 4 o'clock, which is a whole other beast. So very long days, but it's very fun. And I'm getting a lot of enjoyment from being, just kind of doing all the things. So it's fun.
Yeah. Did you like it? I know the show with the dragon was stressful. How'd it go?
I think it went okay. We had a couple shows where there were like a couple little like minor hiccups. Like during one show, I had a kid go under the fence and come very close to the animatronic. I had to like very gently kind of shoo him back under the fence because he wanted to get pieces of the pumpkin that had smashed right there on the ground.
Yeah.
And the last show on Sunday was just like 4 people, and they got up and left halfway through. So then we were just like talking to each other essentially, which was fine.
That'll probably happen, depending if it's like a colder day or...
I'm enjoying it so far. I like the people that I'm on the team with, and it's a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad. It's gone well so far.
All right, shall we?
We shall.
We love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Maddie.
And we'll see you next time with another tale
As old as crime.